Hey, everybody. JJ Cooper, Geoff Pontes here. Baseball America World Series preview podcast. We didn't want to go. I know that Jeff's already talked to Dylan a little bit about the World Series, but I wanted to talk World Series with Geoff, kind of just do a preview pod before this starts. I would say that we both fit in the category. We love postseasons, we love baseball, but even though neither of us have a rooting interest in this, I would say that we both fit in the really excited about this World Series. Geoff, what are you feeling as we sit here recording this on World Series Eve?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing for me is this is the premium matchup that I think everybody from a best team standpoint, right? The best possible game. There's really no conversation about two other teams were probably better and they had a bad luck or this injury happened or whatever. This is two juggernauts. I don't think we've had a World Series of this magnitude and star power, frankly. Um, I don't know if we've had one in my lifetime. I think like when you start to go back historically over some of the numbers, and I think I shared some of them with you, Sarah Langs, who did great work, had tweeted out a bunch of these the other day. But when you look at things like, it's the first time, and it might be since the 50s that the two home run leaders have faced off from the AL and NL in a World Series. It's the first time since 2012 we've seen the presumptive MVPs in Shohei Ohtani on the NL side and Aaron Judge on the AL side. It's the first time they've met since 2012. I think the first time before that was 1988. And then just looked at the expansion period. So it was 69 on. And a majority of them were in the 70s with like those great Reds teams. And then whatever team would pop up and try and challenge them.
The
Of course,
A's or the Red Sox or whoever.
Yeah, and they lost to the Orioles in 72, right? So, I mean, in 70 as well. So, I think, like, to me, I said this to my father yesterday. I said, there's like a Ken Burns documentary, Bob Costas documentary voice element set up for this series. If it goes 6 or 7 games and we get some memorable all-time classics, that would be great. But I think it has the opportunity to be one of these World Series where everybody remembers when Ohtani's, World Series debut and him and Judge traded home runs and Juan Soto and Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts. There's so much star power here that I think for me, that's the thing I'm most focused on is like, wow, this is the Mickey Mantle versus the Dodgers kind of matchup that my grandfather would have talked about, or my father or my uncle,
We have 4 different players who've already won MVPs playing in this series. Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani's won 2, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman. And Freddie Freeman. Like that's remarkable. Juan Soto hasn't won an MVP award, but I think that we can all agree that Juan Soto, it would not surprise any of us if Juan Soto has an MVP before his career is out. I mean, he's a top tier. We have a Cy Young winner in Garrett Cole. We have 30 All-Star appearances for the Dodgers combined, 30 All-Star appearances for the Yankees combined. And that's active rosters. We're not talking about guys on IL or things like that, but the projected, because they haven't had to finalize them yet, but projected active rosters. That's a lot of star power. Like you said, if you said right now and you did a ranking of give me the 10 best players in the game at this moment, I would say that 4 of the players in this series would be in that group. Maybe, I don't know if you go 5, but probably 4. I would say that Judge, Ohtani, slam dunk, Betts, slam dunk, Soto, slam dunk. Then you would get into, okay, does Garrett Cole fit in that? Again, I think Freddie Freeman maybe a little bit too banged up, a little bit at the tail end but you could, again, those are guys who have been there. This is everything you could ask for from that standpoint. It's West Coast versus East Coast. It's big markets. It's big brands. I like the way that Geoff Passan put it. We got a story on our site you can check out about how this is the year where I would not be surprised at all if the World Series goes back above the NBA Finals in ratings. But Geoff Passan put it another way, which I thought was interesting, which is this is the year we're going to find out what is the ceiling of a World Series ratings in 2024. Because, like you said, Geoff, it's really hard to kind of spell out like what you could do to make a World Series more compelling to what I would say is the casual fan, right? Like we're not the casuals. You're listening to this, you're probably not the casual fan. But my kids who have no interest in baseball know who Shohei Ohtani is, and they know who Decoy is. And, like they actually ask about Decoy, to be honest, more than they ask about Shohei. But that kind of thing. Like these are big brands that could bring in fans who normally are not going to tune in to the World Series in just a normal run of the mill year. So we're going to see what that is. But this is the Baseball America podcast. We're not going to spend the podcast digesting Judge versus Ohtani or things like that. We're going to go a little more granular because that's what we do. And Geoff, one of the things that does stand out to me, these are lineups that are star-studded. Like the Yankees lineup, not just star-studded, but like expected to be star-studded. It's another story up at baseballamerica.com. You can check out where we kind of found this. Like the Yankees will have days where their entire starting lineup will be players who were top 100 prospects at one time, because every single one, and by the way, not just them, but then some guys who are on the bench as well will be top 100, former top 100 prospects. The Dodgers don't have that. We never ranked Kike Hernandez in the top 100. He's probably going to start most games. There are a couple others, but they are also loaded with players who are long thought to be greats, who've proven to be great. But when we look at even, before you take out all the Dodgers starting pitching injuries, one thing that does jump out to me here, Geoff, is I don't want to overemphasize like making lessons from the teams who make it the World Series. But when I look at these two bullpens, it does really jump out to me that these are not star-studded bullpens. These are bullpens where if you said anywhere, it's hard to say that two teams who are spending as much as these teams are spending are going the cheap route. But it does jump out to me that two members of the Yankees bullpen were pitching for the White Sox in 2024, the worst team, not just in baseball this year, but the worst team in baseball in many years. And the White Sox said, nah, we're good, and just cast them aside. And the Yankees are like, yeah, we'll take them. And here they are. You have a Jake Cousins, you have Tim Hill, you have Tim Maiza, who was same thing with the Blue Jays. They've taken cast-offs and turned them into useful players in the postseason here. Luke Weaver has become kind of their lights-out closer, and I would say
got him off of waivers in September 23.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. So, am I overgoing here? Overdoing this? And again, on the Dodgers side too, the Dodgers have some relievers not on the roster in some cases who are making some significant money, but Ryan Brazier, who's been starting games for them, 2023 Red Sox release. Anthony Bonda, acquired in this year from the Guardians for cash considerations, which anytime you see traded for cash considerations, that is, we're getting rid of this guy, but if you want him, we're willing to send him your way. Blake Trinan is not a big money guy. Daniel Hudson, not a big money guy. Brent Honeywell claimed off waivers from the Pirates, and he's pitching for them. They do have some draftees. Ben Kasparius, who was in our top 30 for the Dodgers this year. Landon Knack is kind of, who was a second round pick. If there's a couple years, has been a top 10 prospect for the Dodgers. But am I going overboard here? But I think it does kind of just show the ephemeral nature of bullpens again, that these two teams could be here. And I tee this up for you because you are Mr. Pitch design and all that for us. Like, it does kind of strike me as like, it's, you love to kind of pull up the sleeves and dive into the analytics and the metrics on this. It does strike me as it's a lot of, again, not everything, but there is a large aspect of making a good bullpen that is figuring out how to get the most out of the pitchers you have, is the way I guess I would put it.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is, just optimizing traits that are outlier or exceptional. And sometimes that is pitch design with a guy like Luke Weaver, who was a name
top 100
prospect at one point, was a starter, and it sort of didn't ever, take off or work with St. Louis, and bounced to, the Diamondbacks, and that didn't work.
Cincinnati.
Yeah. Ended up in Seattle afterward. And the Yankees, get this guy at the end of last season, and they figure something out with, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here from some bits and pieces I've pulled together from, different content that's been out there, but more or less, improved in the spin efficiency on his four seam fastball and changed, I think, the grip on his changeup, and just really allowed him to, number one, you know, get to a little bit more velocity, get behind the ball a little bit more, so there was more ride, and then made that change up even more effective, with some of the changes there on the fastball and how it played off of that. And then I think the grip was altered a little bit as well, but he kind of ticked up in a few small ways that you sort of wonder when they acquired this guy. Did they see traits, or was he showing something late in the season with Seattle that they were like, "Hey, if this guy's available, let's pick him up." And I think like Clay Holmes is good, but not as dominant as he had been, and he's a little up and down. But when he's right, he drives a ton of ground ball outs. It's a really interesting look as well. So I think he gives you something a little bit different from Weaver, and I think Weaver's emergence allowed them to then not have to rely on Holmes as the closer. He's kind of at this point, pretty much supplanted him. But
which deepened their pen.
yeah, and I think you then look at some of the other guys that had successful years. Tommy Kahnle's been in this organization, with the Dodgers at one point, with the White Sox, with the Rockies, kind of been up and down from AAA, have these great seasons. He's just throwing like nothing but changeups now. like in almost entirely. He had one outing where he threw like 30 something consecutive changeups or something crazy. So he gives you a different look. And then, you bring in Jake Cousins, who then gives you a different look from, either of those guys that we mentioned. So I think that's all part of it. Is you just have this, variations of looks. You got a lot of sinker ball guys in this pen. When you're talking about Holmes and Cousins, and then Tim Hill is entirely a ground ball guy. He's got in season this year, he has a near 70% ground ball rate. So and doesn't throw very hard, but it's an unusual look. So they're able to just change, I'll say, it's almost eye levels and release points and pitch types, and just kind of give you an uncomfortable look each inning when they're deploying this bullpen. I think that's one of the reasons that they've been successful. And the Dodgers, it's really not all that different. They have a bunch of different looks. They have a ton of power in that bullpen. Both of these bullpens, rate pretty highly in terms of stuff plus in the playoffs. I think I looked at some chart. I think it might have been Eno that made it the other day, and he had like what the average is for the playoffs and like where teams fell in terms of stuff and control plus, and they were both pretty similar from that perspective. But I think once again, like you go through here and there's free agents, a trade for Kopech. They got Evan Phillips off of waivers from the Rays back in August of 21, signed, Daniel Hudson in December of 21. They purchased Anthony Vanda from
And they signed
the
Daniel
Guardians.
Hudson, and then they bring him back, and then they bring him back, and then they bring him back.
Yeah.
He's been like a
Yeah,
blanket.
exactly. Yeah, and Ryan Brazier was signed, as a free agent from the Red Sox. You mentioned Honeywell. They have a homegrown guy here, and Henriquez, though I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of him probably in the World Series. And the Knack and Kasperius. There are some guys they've drafted, but I think the bullpen game, and it's something that the teams that have good bullpens, we've seen it with the Orioles, where they're kind of always consistently churning those back end of the 40-man roster spots to acquire some of these guys. And if they have good advanced scouting and analysts that are identifying things and understand their coaching staff and their player development department, and they're sort of in lockstep in terms of philosophy and how the acquisition sort of funnels down, I think that you end up with stronger bullpens and the ability to withstand some major injuries that, certainly the Dodgers had to withstand this year. So it is interesting. And I think we understand at this point, modern baseball, the bullpens are going to be a big part of the conversation in this series. They're going to control some games, and how well they perform is going to determine probably who wins this series.
So, Geoff, you just kind of teed this off here, which is, I thought at first, if you asked me, I think I was on a radio show last weekend. They said, "So who do you think's going to win?" And I said the Yankees. And my reasoning is that they have a much more comfortable, much more set starting pitching. They have Cole, who I would assume is at least going to give you 2 starts in this, and might be available for a third game depending on how this all goes. If it goes 7. You've got Carlos Rodon, who has been a little bit hot and cold, but I do always love the ability for Carlos Rodon to kind of rise to the moment. We've seen that going back to his days at NC State. This is a team that has, then they have Clark Schmidt, they have Luis Hill. This is a team that doesn't need to go to a bullpen game. The Dodgers have already said they're going to have a bullpen game. They might end up having more than that because we know that they're going to have Yamamoto. We know that at some point we're going to see Walker Buehler, and we know we're going to see Jack Flaherty. Like Flaherty and Yamamoto are kind of their starters, and then Buehler's their one where they're like, he'll go at some point, but we'll see kind of how this goes because Buehler obviously is not the same as he's been at his best. And then they're going to have a bullpen game. They may end up kind of, depending on how Buehler goes, even having multiple. And so I was like, okay, the Yankees I think are going to win this. Both teams have great lineups. Then I did a little bit more work for a story that's up at BA, and kind of looked in this, and it's like, oh, I really thought, like, let's just start with a bullpen game, a game where you start a reliever and you are throwing Johnny Holstaff, the old Sunday in college baseball approach to this, where it's like we got our Friday starter, we got our Saturday starter, and then we've got everyone else to get us to to win a game on Sunday. I kind of, that is a position of desperation in some ways. This is not somewhere that the Dodgers want to be. In an ideal world, Tyler Glasnow would be starting, and it'd be like, okay, we're starting with Glasnow. We got Yamamoto. We've got Flaherty. And by the way, a healthy Clayton Kershaw is going to pitch game 4. Okay, great. Wonderful. And by the way, or it could be Tony Gonsolin or Dustin May or, Gavin Stone. We could go down the list of guys who are hurt who could have been. So this is not the way the Dodgers wrote it out. But diving into that, I kind of did expect, I didn't expect that it was going to be like, oh, teams are winning 30% of the time when they start a bullpen game. But I did expect that going back to the last decade when you have a bullpen game in the postseason, that teams would be 15-15 in those. Like it's not even been like a disadvantage in those games. And teams are above 500 in winning the series in which they bullpen game. The Dodgers this year, the Diamondbacks last year, the Braves in 21, and the Dodgers in 20 all had bullpen games while getting to the World Series. And in the case of the 2020 Dodgers and the 2021 Braves, in winning the World Series. So there's this part of me that kind of thinks like, oh, if you have to bullpen in the World Series, that probably means you're really tying one arm behind your back. I can't say that anymore. I think, to preface, I think I'm switching my pick. I'm now, I'm going to own this. It's not something where if the Yankees win this, I go, see, I was on Mad Dog Radio last weekend and I picked it. I'm owning that I'm switching my pick, but I'm going to say Dodgers.
You're just playing to the audience, JJ.
Yeah, I'm going both ways, but no, I do think that I thought that was going to be more of a disadvantage than maybe it will be. Like, I kind of lead into that, Geoff, like before we get your pick. Obviously, the reason teams use bullpen games is because they are out of starters. But I would say the second part of that is that there's the way that the game has changed now is if this was 2011, then the Dodgers would be starting Landon Knack and kind of saying, look, we know that Landon Knack's not an ideal scenario, but he's stretched out. He's our best option for game 4, and we're only going to start him once in the series. And what teams have come to realize is you're much better off throwing an array of lesser pitchers in very small slices than you are to say, hey, are we going to catch lightning in a bottle and get 15 outs from one of those guys. Is that a good way to explain why bullpenning has become more prevalent in the postseason?
Yeah, and I think if you just go back to watching playoff games situationally over the years, if there's a starter that goes out there and gets murdered in the first inning, more often or second, more often than not, those guys were getting pulled out of games anyway. What I think it does allow you to do is you understand the matchup and the opponent, and um, you sort of get to play matchups throughout the game. And maybe you do have somebody like Landon Knack, and Knack can go 3 innings. And you get up to you get up in the second inning 6-0, something like that happens, right? You score in the first and the second. All of a sudden, you're kind of on cruise control. Like, yeah, we'll let Knack go a few innings, and then, if we get into trouble, we have all these other options. And if you start to build up that lead, and the game is kind of out of hand in the 7th inning, you're using the back end of your bullpen. Now, on the other side of it, if you do need these guys and it's a tight game throughout, you're going to be able to deploy a variety of options. And I think the way that these bullpens are built too, you don't really have like the closer. There's no guy coming out here. There's no Mariano where he's getting the 9th, right? They can sort of play the matchups on both sides. And I think ultimately that allows you to maybe navigate the game even more efficiently. We've seen some really well-pitched bullpen games throughout this playoff run, and especially with the Dodgers, we've seen some really good games. And I think overall that it's aesthetically not pleasing, but I think the numbers and just being able to play the matchups and manage the game how you want, and consistently have guys out there, with good stuff who can't get outs in a role, more so to speak, that they're comfortable with. I think that probably speaks volumes, as opposed to having to roll out with, a guy you're hoping gives you 5 and can dive, without giving up more than 2 runs.
The thing that stands out to me with it, two things that kind of feed this, and I don't know have an answer for it, but if you want a bullpen, the World Series is about the easiest place to bullpen, because we're going Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday's off. That's a full reset where even if your bullpen's a little gassed, not a lot, but a little gassed, okay, you get to reset again. Then we go 3 days again. Then you get another day off, reset again, game 6, 7. So we are in a situation here where you get to rest and recover for one. But the other is like you said, especially the Dodgers facing the Yankees. I kind of like, when you talk about game planning it, there's probably no team more prone to being game planned than this Yankees lineup, because you kind of look at it as, is this a Soto Judge inning, Soto Judge Stanton inning, or is this a everyone else inning? You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, who's batting this inning? Rizzo, Volpe, Verdugo. Okay, we're going to attack those guys. But that's different than Soto's leading off this inning. That's an inning that you're going to approach differently, in a way that the Dodgers lineup is a little bit not as easy to game plan. Obviously, you're 100%. I think that you saw the Padres do this really well. Didn't get them out of it completely, but like Shohei Ohtani, you want to make sure that you have the pitcher you want facing Ohtani in almost any non-first, maybe third inning situation, right? If it's the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and the game is close, you're like, who is our best guy to get Ohtani out? We want him in the game. You're looking at Betts, you're looking at Freeman. The top of this order is really strong, especially if Freddie can move a little bit better now, having had a couple more days to recover. But the bottom of this lineup also, like Tommy Edman, Kike Hernandez, postseason Babe Ruth when it comes to, I think, 15 postseason home runs or something, which is absurd.
It's like, I was about to say that he goes from like a 45 to like a 60, 70 in the playoffs.
Teoscar, Andy Pages, like, this is a lineup where there's more guys where you need to kind of match up, I'd say a little bit more than it is with the Yankees. And we're going to probably see that a lot in this series. So that tees me up to ask you, okay, I'm picking Dodgers in I'll go 7. I want this. There's a little bit of a rooting for baseball part there. If this
Yeah.
series goes 7 and it's Dodgers-Yankees and we've got a game 7, that is about as best we can have it for baseball. But what's your pick?
Yeah. So in the offseason, Dylan and I both picked Yankees versus Dodgers, which we picked the easy one. I mean, it's not like we're like some great prognosticators because of this, but I picked Dodgers in 5. So I picked it in the offseason. There's no reason for me to change my mind. So I'm going to say Dodgers in 5, but I think it will be some close, hard fought games over this 5-game series. But part of me does want to see it go 7. But yeah, I'm going with the Dodgers. I just think the offenses in this series are both so good at the top, and they're going to produce a fair amount of runs that I think it could negate some of the starting pitching advantages. Particularly when you get beyond the first two, because I think Cole versus Flaherty and then Rodon versus Yamamoto are pretty good matchups. But I do think the bullpens are going to come into play, and
Brazier versus Schmidt, is not the same.
No, it's not. Though Schmidt has honestly been really, really good. I think that's
Yeah.
the differentiator there is like him and Heel being to roll those guys out there is definitely a bit of an advantage for keeping the bullpen fresh, especially if this does go 7 games. But I just think that Dodgers offense is just so relentless. You look 1 through 9 right now with the way that Enrique Hernandez has been hitting, and Tommy Edman on top of that. And it's well balanced between lefties and righties. Of course, Edman is a switch hitter as well. So they're tough to match up against too, because there's not sort of this long run of right-handers or left-handers or whatever. And I think you could probably say that for both lineups to an extent, but it's just deeper. And I think offensively they're gonna overtake the Yankees. So yeah, I think it could be a great series. Wouldn't shock me if the Yankees win this series. No bias there at all, but I think in the end it's going to be the Dodgers.
It's going to be fun though. We both know that we're going. We can't wait. Here we go. This is what we kind of build up to. There's here's a selfish one on my end. Again, I don't have a rooting interest in this, but when I went out to the spring training, one of the first things I saw out of spring training was Andy Pages hit 2 home runs in a backfield spring training game. It would be really kind of cool as a bookend if Andy Pages kind of hits he already had a 2 home run game in the postseason, but if he had a big homer at the end of it, it's like, okay, that's a perfect bookend on the selfish JJ season, which is to start the year by seeing someone do something great on the backfields and to see him end it by doing something great in the World Series. That would be, again, from a personal perspective, that would be fun. From a personal perspective, I'm really excited that Brent Honeywell is getting this opportunity. I've done
Me
the
too.
Rays list for many, many years on and off, and I feel like I wrote him up so many years where it was like, if Honeywell can stay healthy, watch out. And then next year be like, but Brent Honeywell did not stay healthy. If Brent Honeywell can stay healthy, watch out. Obviously, the career, there's kind of a sliding doors here thing where there's a different version where Brent Honeywell starting one of these games because he ended up being the starter we thought he was going to be. But it is still cool to see him get this opportunity. Someone who had to grind through injury rehab after injury rehab after injury rehab to get here.
Yeah, and I think the setting of that is important too. Like, I mean, he was on the cusp of the major leagues, had not been injured at that point, and I think in a lot of other organizations in the right year probably would have been up in the big leagues in August of that year. I can remember him tweeting at the Rays. Like every time someone tweeted that you should call up Brett Honeywell, I think he actually retweeted it. And he was always kind of a character too. So I think in some way, shape, or form, the tragedy seems to be heading to a good place, even if it's not in the role that we had intended. But entering his age 30 season next year as a potential World Series champion, I think that's at least a nice positive of a career that had a lot of speed bumps.
But Well, we're going to look forward to seeing it. We'll have a lot here at baseballamerica.com in the upcoming weeks. But thank you, Geoff, and thank you for the download. Another Baseball America World Series podcast in this case. Please like and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, click the bell. If you're doing on your podcast, if you want to leave us a review, that always helps other people discover the podcast. For Geoff, I'm JJ. So long, everybody.